Okay, now we're live on Riverside. I'm going to dive into this with you guys today and go through the slides. So today we're going to be talking about part one of our masterclass series. Again, there's going to be 3 different parts of this. Really excited to put this together for you guys. Today, though, we're going to get into how we find our deals, like how we market, how we negotiate, how we get into and actually the whole process of like finding an off-market deal. And then we're going to talk about how do we underwrite those, how do we do our due diligence, and then at the end of it, we're going to talk about how do we fund it. And the last thing is we're going to talk about some case studies and kind of show you those examples throughout. All right, jump into the slides here. So introducing myself, a lot of you guys have probably met me by now, and I'll try to keep this part short. But ultimately, in a nutshell, I worked my W-2 job for 12 years while I really built up this company. But what I built was a company that goes direct to seller. You can see our logo here of our Wow Houses company. That's the company that goes direct to seller. That's going to be a big focus of today's call. But I also built out kind of in order, it was my property management company because I was managing property from Houston, even though all my property was in Wyoming and Montana. I was literally managing it from hundreds, thousands of miles away, and I was able to do that. So I built a system to where we actually do that with a team now. So we have a fully functional property management team that we've built out. So that's one pillar of it. And then I talked about the direct to seller arm with Wow Houses. And the last thing has been Revive. That is our construction team, because we found over the years, one of the biggest limiting and biggest risks in our business was working with contractors and being able to keep contractors accountable and stay on budget and stay on timeline. So we bit the bullet a couple years ago and we're like, you know what, we're going to bring people in-house, make this more predictable. And this has become probably one of the strongest pillars of our business and really one of the most impactful pillars of our business. So that's kind of me in a nutshell, fully integrated or vertically integrated company that really allows us to control the deal from start all the way through the construction, all the way through the finish when we're ready to turn it over and keep it, hand it over to property management. Okay, so I want to frame this up today with really what's going on in the markets with interest rates, because we're going to have a big focus on creative finance today and how that is involved throughout the process for us, because it's changing the game, right? This graph really here shows it. Like we basically show, this is like the historical mortgage rates over the last 30 years. You can see this huge spike that we had when interest rates started rising, right? You see the drop when rates were dropped during COVID, and then you see that huge spike. So yeah, it's definitely impacted the industry, but I just wanted to kind of set the stage right there. Okay. So now this is actually, I was talking about this a second ago, but out of our 25 out of our last 26 deals in the last, and this is, I said 6 months here, this is more like the last 3 months that we put together. These are all the deals we've done. And you'll see 25 out of 26 were some form of creative finance. I've got different types here highlighted in my slide, from like wraps to seller finance to novations to our Revive method. I'm going to talk about all these different ways of creative finance. But the point here I want you to see, guys, is we're doing a ton of our deal flow because of interest rates. We're not really, I spent years working with small banks, and that's how I really built my portfolio initially. But as of late, we really haven't been using the banks a ton. We've been using private money lenders and using creative finance. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's what we're going to kind of talk about at the very end, is how do we finance these deals. But I wanted to show you guys how much creative finance has impacted our business. So why have we had so much of a focus on that? Well, let me kind of explain, just so you guys understand, give you like seller finance 101. Right. So there's a couple different ways we do seller finance. And I like to break it into like 3 different pieces, right? So think about the seller that's selling you the house. The first question is, do they have a loan on the house? If they own it free and clear, that's probably the simplest way to do seller finance, because really that's a good way where you can go buy the house with minimal money down, because there's no loan in play. The seller doesn't have an existing loan. They have it free and clear. That gives you a ton of flexibility when you're trying to set up a creative finance deal. The second one is that the seller has a loan, but a lot of equity. So that is our go-to, our hybrid strategy. So what we mean by a hybrid is typically we're going to make an offer where we're going to take over their loan, subject to, which I'm going to define a little bit later. We're going to take over that loan. And then we're also going to issue them another promissory note or another loan to the seller for their equity. So easy numbers, if they house is worth $200,000, they owe $100,000. We're going to take over their $100,000 loan, and then we're going to create a second position loan with the seller, and then we're going to make payments or have some sort of structured terms on the equity portion. So we call that a hybrid because, again, the seller has a loan and they have equity, making it a hybrid. Okay. So the last kind of seller finance piece is if they have, the seller has a loan and they have little to no equity. right? So these are great ones to be sub twos. And a lot of people, this is the list. This is a marketing strategy a ton of investors do, to where they try to just find people that have loans but no equity, because those are typically people that can be distressed. And typically those people have no other option than to sell sub two, because they literally, by the time they go sell the house with an agent, they might actually have to bring money to closing, because they're going to have to, there's not much equity, right? And that equity might get eaten up by the closing fees and by the agent commissions and all that. So their only option might be to sell with creative finance. And often they'll be like, I put a note in here that we'll do those sub two. Sometimes we will give them a little bit of cash, and sometimes that's enough to push them over, right? They're like, well, if I go through and list this and go through all that headache, I could do that, or I could just take $5,000 and be done with this thing. And that's a great deal for us, because we get into a potentially a cash flowing property or a flip for like $5,000 down, and the rest is finance. So it's a really beautiful way to acquire property. Okay, so how these are structured, again, depending on your state, there's really kind of two different ways to go, two different paths, right? You have kind of your contract for deed, or it might be a land contract. It's called something different almost in every state. Well, there's just a lot of different ways they call this, or what they call this contract. But that is essentially the way that one works is you're going to have a contract with an escrow company that's going to have the terms from how you're buying it from the seller. But typically the big difference between that and the mortgage and deed, which is the second one, is the deed, right? In a contract for deed, the deed typically is not transferred and recorded. It's typically held in an escrow account. But in a straight sale where you transfer the deed and then you take over the mortgage, in that scenario, the deed is actually transferred from the seller to the buyer at the time of closing. And then typically there'll be a mortgage in place if it's a hybrid, right? I talked about that a second ago. In a hybrid situation, they will transfer the deed. If I'm the buyer, my seller is going to transfer me the deed. And then if they have some equity in the house, I'm going to give them back a mortgage, and then I'm going to make payments based on those terms. Okay. So those are two ways to structure deals. Talk about the benefits to the seller, right? Like, why, this is probably the question I get the most, is why would anybody ever let you take over their loan? Like, why would they keep their name on the loan? Why would they want to do seller finance? Well, there's a lot of different reasons. The most common one I've seen lately with these, probably the biggest and the best deals we're putting together, is they want to avoid capital gains. Like, a lot of these people bought their properties 10, 20, 30, who knows how, 50 years ago. And that property is worth way more money than when they bought it. So if they were to sell it outright today, they're going to pay a big chunk of that money they make is going to go back to the IRS. So what we do is we structure this seller finance, and we stretch out the payments over time, and it can limit the amount of money that they have to pay in taxes. Sometimes it can completely eliminate. Like we just did a deal in Laramie where we're spreading this thing out over 10 years for these people. They're not going to pay any capital gains on it. So it's a really, really easy sell to, once the seller understands that benefit, right? The other thing is sometimes they'll make more money over time. Often we'll give them the highest offer, which you're going to see in this presentation, is we can offer more when you do seller finance, and they might even make interest, right? But if they're looking at, hey, I just want the most money I can out of my house, which a lot of people do, then seller finance is often going to be the key there. It just is going to be money over time. The last one is it's a fast closing, right? We don't have to get an appraisal often. We don't need to, we can or cannot, depending on whether we want to, do inspections. We don't have to wait on like lenders and appraisals and all this. Like, it's just a much faster process, and you can close it much quicker when you're doing creative finance. There's just less variability because at the end of the day, you're not having to deal with a new bank that's going to make you jump through all these hoops and all these potential things that could blow up the deal. So that's just a quick high level overview of seller finance. Now let's kind of dig into, hey, why, like, how do we find, where do we start?
One comment on that, if I can hop in.
Yes, absolutely, Rivers.
One other thing with the seller financing, another reason somebody may want to do it, is that there's a lot of people right now with low interest rate loans on their houses that now those don't exist. So you have a lot of people with 3 and 4% loans now, 7-8% loans, or what you would get as a new buyer. So instead of selling a property, you have to reach the new buyer has to take a new loan for 8%, 7%. Well, if you have some value as the seller in being able to sell your property with that low interest financing on it, and that creates essentially, instead of giving that value to the bank with a new loan, you can basically get a little higher price or justify a higher price because it's like you get a lower interest rate. You're getting it for a lower interest rate. So there's kind of a way by existing needs.
Yeah, man. Great point, Rivers. Because, yeah, there's so much, a lot of people just talk about because of interest rates, how much less affordability, like literally if you, they show like little tables or charts of like what people could afford when rates were 3% and now what they can afford at 8, it just drops that down, right? This, doing it this way allows people to pay more for the property. Man, that's a great point. Cool. All right. So now let's kind of segue into like start from like the ground level. If you're going to like, how do we go find our deals? Like, how do we start? Like, what list do we pull? How do we market to it? Well, here's a bunch of different ways that we can market to it. We from like kind of like the paid services is here on the top to like down to like the more free services. So you could use PropStream as a great website that we use. That's typically like about $99 a month. You could pull a lot of data from PropStream, and it's typically, and they've got a lot of ways you could filter the data. You could always use ListSource as another good one, ClearSkip as well. And then some of the more expensive types of data where like you're literally getting filtered data and you're getting like this is some of the best data out there, and they understand more motivation, right? Is like Audantic and 80/20. But again, this is where you get into like stacking your data. And what stacking means is you could stack, okay, well, actually stacking data will make more sense in my next slide because it'll show all these different kind of levels of motivation for sellers, and they stack them to where if they've got all these different motivations, well, that's going to be a more motivated lead in theory, right? But you'll typically pay more money, the most money for that type of data. When it comes to like free data, if you just want to get started, and we still do this to this day, is we'll go to there's just a lot of data that's public record. So we'll go to the county and we'll pull the county records. And I got this little screenshot here on my slide showing you like all the criteria we could pull. Like I can pull year built. I can pull obviously the owner's address, mailing address. I could pull the assessed value. I could pull bedroom count, bathroom count, a lot of these different characteristics to help me really filter down my list. So that's one great way to just go pull a bunch of data and do it for free. Something really cool though I wanted to show you guys that we've been doing is this has literally just happened over the last couple of months with AI. So check this out. What we're able to do now is we'll take that state data basically all this data, this free data from the county. And then what we'll do is we'll go use AI and we work with one of our partners that does our direct mail, and they've got a known list of like, I think it's 180,000 sellers, right? These sellers had some sort of motivation. So it's a known list of motivated people. They'll take that list and then they'll take our list and they'll basically use AI to be like, okay, we know this list is motivated. How do we score my list that I give to them? So they'll go give it a score based on that AI doing all that research and AI doing what AI does, right? And it'll literally give our data and score it all. So what was kind of cool is we had a list of about 100,000 potential sellers. We pared that down based on rankings to about 15,000 people that, like, based on this AI, should have more motivation. So that's a even more affordable way than to try to do it with like some of these expensive data companies. Talking about the data though, in the niche list, this is what I was highlighting a second ago, is there's all these different ways you can find motivation, right? These are the people, absentee owners. That's kind of the most basic. I highlighted that one because if you just want to hit one list that typically is a good list to hit, it's absentee owners. What that means is people who don't live in the house. So this could be a landlord. This could be somebody, there's just a ton of different issues, but a ton of different reasons why they might be absentee. But it's simply as simple as the mailing address and the property address are not the same. So that's one easy list to pull. It's free and you can get a lot from it, right? But as you go down here, you start to see more motivated lists like pre-foreclosures, vacant houses, tax delinquent, code violations, expired listings, for sale by owner lists, driving for dollars. These are all different niche lists that you could pull, right? But these bigger data companies, what they do is they take all these different lists and they stack them. But I wanted to give you guys just a good feel for all the different lists that you can look at. We typically pull all these different lists and try to stack it ourselves so we can really, when we're spending marketing dollars, we want to make sure we spend them on the most motivated leads, right? You could spend a lot of money casting a wide net, or you could spend less money at a more targeted list. Now let's talk about marketing channels. So now we've got our list, right, that we're ready to market to. Well, how do we market to that? Well, what we do is we do a ton of, these are our kind of big ones, our direct mail, TV and radio. TV and radio, we've kind of done less of, but it's more of a growth opportunity for us in the future. Cold calling has been really, actually, as of late, that's been a great one for us. SMS, this is definitely a dying one that's starting to go away, but been very successful over the years for us to bring leads. That's definitely the cheapest. As far as cost per lead, SMS is typically the cheapest. Then you get into digital marketing, right? We do all these. We'll do our Facebook ads. We have pay-per-click with Google. We'll have our website that we're just trying to funnel people to our website through SEO and search engine optimization, right? And then we also do pay per lead. This is another great one that we do, that like somebody else is paying to buy all these leads and they sell them to us. And then if we can close them, that's another great way to do it. That's one good way that I've always liked to go test out a new market, is I'll go just do pay per lead. It allows me to go test that market, and I don't have to go fully launch my pay-per-click and my Facebook and my SEO, all these different things. I can just go test the market with paying somebody else to basically do that. So those are the more kind of high cost of marketing. As far as some other lower cost, and it's more high touch, and we do these ones as well, is going direct to agent, right? We have campaigns where we're always networking, trying to find more agents in these different markets we're in, because they work off commission anyway. So they'll go, and they're typically, if you find the right agent, they're hungry, they're trying to find deals. So that's a great way to find stuff. Also, expired listings. That's another good list that you can go pull. That doesn't really, if you know an agent, they can pull that for you and there's no cost. And then another one is 60 to 90 days on the market, right? If a house has been sitting on the market, typically those people are more motivated, and that's a great list to pull that doesn't cost really any money. And the last one is driving for dollars, right? If you really want to talk about the best list, we talk about barrier to entry, right? This one has a high barrier to entry, right? Anybody can go pull a list from the county, right? Less people will go pay a data company to go pull all this data and get like stackable data. Anyone can do that, right? Anyone can drive for dollars, but that takes a lot of time. And that's literally somebody driving the streets, looking at houses that are run down and writing the addresses down and then marketing to those. But that's a really cool niche strategy. We still have a small piece of our team that's trying that out at times. We've kind of gone back and forth on that one, but it's still a great strategy. All right. So we've talked about finding our list, to how do we market to it. Now let's say we got a lead and we're trying to close a deal. Like how do we negotiate and work with a seller once they raise their hand and say they want to sell? So I kind of went over our calls, but this is how I set up our calls. I actually have my lead manager that helps me a ton with this. She does a lot of this for me. But it's all about building rapport with the seller, right? Immediately, like, why do these people sell to us? Well, ultimately, based on our track record and experience, they trust us, right? And we take the time to understand their problem. At the end of the day, we're just trying to help them out with the problem, right? So it's building rapport, building trust. We are always asking questions to understand their motivation. What's their problem, right? One big thing we do, this is just a really cool negotiating trick that I've learned and a lot of people talk about, is dropping an anchor, right? We like to always drop an anchor, because at the end of the day, I want to pull out, like, what are they thinking? How much are they wanting to get for this house? Are we even close, right? Before I go ask my agent to go check out this house, like, do these people want twice what it's worth, right? Or maybe they're willing to sell it at a discount. But the way I do that is I'll drop an anchor. So I'll typically say, hey, well, I bought a house in your neighborhood last year, and we paid $50,000 for this. It was pretty run down, but like, we bought it from them. They needed to be sold, and I'll drop, and that might be a really, really low anchor, but you need to justify your anchor, right? Like, you can't just throw out a number, otherwise they're going to be offended. But I just say, hey, I bought a house for $50,000. Is that like, in that way, you're throwing out a number. Typically that gets them talking, right? And then they'll ultimately give you their number, right? The next step is we start to go into our LOI, right? So we do, instead of sending like our contract right away, we'll do a letter of intent. So this letter of intent, we'll typically give them multiple options. And when I'm talking with them on the phone, this is what I think really separates our company from most other people, because we've done so many creative finance deals and we understand it. And it's very nuanced trying to understand creative finance. Not many people can do it. But what we'll do is we'll be like, hey, here's my cash offer. Here is my creative finance offer. Do you want to get more money over time? And if that's the case, then it's like, well, why don't you go with I'm very transparent with them. Like, hey, I can give you the cash offer, but it's a lot lower. And that's always an option. But what I would recommend to you is, if you have time and don't need all that money immediately, let's talk about our creative options. So we always try to give them multiple options. And then the last phase of it is, so once we've kind of gone through all these things and we're ready to go see the house, what we'll do is we'll go schedule our agent to go see that house. So a lot of people ask me, like, how do you buy in all these different cities? How do you buy across Wyoming and Montana when I'm here in Houston, right? Well, the way we do is we have a specific dedicated agent in each city. They'll go walk the properties. There's a lot of benefits they get from us because a lot of these houses might not even work out and might be a listing for them. Also, if we're going to end up flipping it or doing a novation, which we'll talk about here in a second, then they'll be able to get that listing, which they're going to make money off of. So there's a lot of incentive for them, and they ultimately help us understand the market, because we'll get into the underwriting and evaluating the deal. But ultimately, I want a second set of eyes, and I want to know somebody who knows that market better than anybody, and those are the people that we partner with. So negotiating the offer, I'm going to kind of skip through this because I'm going to dive deeper into this when I talk about underwriting a little bit later, but this is kind of how we run our numbers. And then, so how about after the call? I kind of touched on this, but again, we're going to send out my agent. My agent's going to go out there. He's going to get photos. He's going to pull all the comps for me. And then we're going to be able to go back and put together an LOI. So from that, getting those numbers, then I can put together a letter of intent that I'll send to the seller with all those options, and we'll send that off to the seller. That gets them thinking, right? Because I'll tell you this, in our market, and this is not maybe true everywhere else. Actually, I know it's not true after talking to other people and other investors and other masterminds. Our people, it's a slow process. We don't find a lot of people that are like, I got to sell and I got to sell tomorrow, or I'm going to be foreclosed on, or something bad's going to happen. They're typically, they want to get to know us. They want to think about it. They want to talk to their spouse, talk to their attorney, whoever. But by us sending a letter of intent, that allows them to look at it, start to give us some feedback, and we keep them engaged, and we keep working them to where ultimately it'll lead to our purchase contract. Any questions thus far?
I had one question on I guess back to the contract for deed. What do you use like one company nationwide to manage that, or do you have a local Wyoming company, or what's the kind of logistics of managing the contract for deed and a subject to payment?
Ooh, good point. And
you maybe get into maybe jump ahead, but I'm just always curious on how do you actually manage that, like payment? Because as a seller, it's like, how do I know my payments getting made? So maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think I don't know if I actually went into that. So yeah, I'll answer that one now, Rivers. Good question. So yeah, that's kind of goes into the back to the two different offers. Remember, I talked about like hybrids. I was talking about like contract for deed, and then we talk about like a mortgage with a deed transfer with a mortgage, right? The two different ways you could set up seller finance. But either way, typically your seller, what makes them feel a lot more comfortable doing the deal is when you say, hey, this isn't like me just making you a payment each month like I'm a tenant or somebody and you're just counting on me to make your payment. What we do is we'll go through an escrow company. So to answer your question, we've got a dedicated one in Wyoming, and he does Montana and anywhere else for us. But what that escrow company does is essentially every month I'll make a payment to the escrow company. And then if it's a hybrid, he's going to then make two payments, right? He's going to go pay the mortgage payment, and then the second payment he's going to go make is to the seller for their equity. But he manages all that. And it's just a really good way to make your sellers feel comfortable that A, you're going to deliver on your promise and you're going to make payments. Because if you don't make a payment, the escrow company is going to let you know. And it also helps when you set up a contract for deed. There's implications to where if I don't hold up my end, my seller is well protected to where if I don't do that, he could take the property back and I lose my asset. So really good question. And really a good way. I think it's just a good way to set it up. A, from an administrative part, which I know me and Rivers have talked a lot about. And then B, just from protecting your seller and just having it done way. And just at the end of the day, you have a third party looking at this. It just makes your seller feel a lot more comfortable. Cool. Well, I talked about this briefly, but how do we make our offer? What we do is we send this letter of intent. So I got a little template here kind of showing you how we do it. We just try to make a simple one pager, give them a couple options, introduce our company. But this has definitely been a game changer for our company, because we used to just send out this long offer and it took a lot of time to generate the offer and then the seller to understand it. And this was a much less friction route to get things done, was send them a letter of intent and then move forward. But once we get kind of a green light and terms agreed to, that's when we move to our purchase and sale agreement. So I've got a template here of what we do. Again, we try to keep it simple, like 3 pages. We don't want to use this big, long contract. We try to make it easier on the sellers we work with. All right, now let's kind of segue into underwriting. So we're about third way through here. Actually, I went through a lot of the heavy stuff already, but underwriting, I want to talk about, hey, how do we evaluate our deals? What does that process look like? So to give you guys some easy rules of thumb, typically the 1% rule. So if you haven't heard of the 1% rule, That's a really easy rule of thumb that anybody can use, and I still think it works really good to this day. It's dependent on your market, but it's a good rule of thumb. So how does this work? You're literally taking your monthly gross rent and you dividing that by the purchase price, right? So if you divide a house that rents for $1,000 a month, if you divide that by, say you buy it for $100,000, 1% or 1,000 divided by 100,000 is 1%. So that would mean that $1,000 house, that $100,000 house that's renting for $1,000 a month is making the 1% rule. If you're getting greater than 1%, man, you've found a great deal. Like, do that deal all day. That's a great buy and hold one. If you're less than 1%, you need to start to look at it, right? If you're close, still probably a deal, right? But if you're getting like 0.5%, then you need to kind of reevaluate, hey, if you're investing for cash flow, then you need to really question that deal. But that's a really good one if you're looking at a rental property. Okay. I'm going to go deeper into this, but I want to start with the basics. Now let's talk about, like, if you're trying to buy and do value add, or maybe you want to do the burst strategy, we're going to buy it at a good enough discount. You're going to rehab it. You're going to refinance it to get your money back and repeat the process. If you're looking at those, you typically want to be at like 70% or less of the aftermarket repair value. So that's, I'll say ARV a lot today. That's the aftermarket repair value. So you want to typically be at 70% of that number minus the repairs. All right. So don't do the repairs first. Literally do 70% of what it's worth. So house is worth 100,000. I'm going to take 70% of that. So I have 70,000. And then if my repairs are 20,000, that means I can offer $50,000 for this house. That 70% helps work in, it's a good cushion for things that could go wrong. It builds in your profit. And also, if you're going to refinance and do the burst strategy, it helps. That's going to be your equity. And that's going to be what helps you to get all your money back at the end, because you've basically created forced equity on this property, right? I'm not going too deep on novations. I've actually got this in my presentation today, but I want to keep it kind of short. We could definitely dive into that another time. But when we do a novation offer, essentially that's just going to be like where we're going to go sell the house on the market, and they're going to give us permission to list it. And often we're going to make repairs or do some improvements to help the property. Typically those we can go up to 90% because there's much less risk on that deal. I'm not taking over the house. I'm not like, I don't have to go tie up all my capital to buy this house. Typically the loan is going to stay in that seller's name, and then we're going to go sell it on the open market. All I'm risking in that scenario is my time and any money that I put into repairs. So we could pay up to 90% on some of those deals, minus the repairs. The last one is seller finance. I would say I could speak confidently and tell you specific deals where we've paid 100% of market value if they gave us the right terms, and say we didn't have to put any money down. I've actually got a case study to show you guys at the end, but what's important here is that you're probably getting cash flow, or you think you're going to get appreciation. If you're not getting any equity on the front end, you want to be careful. But if you're getting cash flow, then it could be a good deal for you. All right, so here's a pro forma. This is kind of diving. Now we're gonna crank it up right here, guys, and go a lot faster. So this is a multifamily asset that we looked at, and I want to kind of show you the pro forma and how we did this. Before I do that, though, to generate so this is kind of what you get at the very end, and this is kind of how we underwrite the deal, right? But I want to go a step before that, right? So the first thing is you got to figure out, well, how much rents am I going to get for this property, right? So this is based on rentals. This isn't based on a flip. This is based on a single family duplex, whatever. This example is a 45 unit apartment complex, right? But any cash flowing rental property, the first step is you got to understand the rent rolls. Like, how much is this property renting for currently? And how much do we think it would rent for once we go in and renovate it, or once we go in and change operations, right? This is understanding how much revenue you could predict. I always like looking at a low, like a base case, and like a high scenario. And this one I actually have even a fourth scenario where we're going to do some short-term rentals, which is going to increase the revenue even more, because I want to show like, hey, here's another scenario where we make even more revenue. But I like to look at all that. And you also want to show what's the current rent roll. I mean, if you're going to a bank right now, they're going to look at the current rent roll and they're going to underwrite based on that. But as a lot of people know who've been in this business and who do value add, where it's currently at is typically not good. If you're finding a good deal, it's currently probably not making money. Like if you're looking at this deal we're looking at, it's not making any money. It's actually losing money, in fact. But when we start to make this pro forma of like, hey, well, what if this thing was fully rented? Then what does that money look like? And that's how we start to project it, right? I've got other notes in here kind of talking about square footage and bed bath counts. But ultimately you got to do these projections, right? And I'm going to show you how to like analyze and figure out these numbers here in just a second. But just looking at some pro forma. So now back to this one, the very top line or second line is the rent per month, right? So all I did in this underwriting is I'm literally feeding in that spreadsheet I just showed you, all the total rent that comes in for these 45 units in the low case, my base case, my high case, and then my short-term rental high, right? So I'm showing all these, that in this table, my big variable that I'm changing is my rents. A lot of these other variables are going to be fixed. So again, top line, you're looking at your revenue, thinking about a P&L here, right? Profit and loss statement. Now we're going to work down and start to figure out our expenses. So this is where another important one you got to dial in, you got to know. And we just know it from doing years of experience. I've had, like, when you do your first rental property, you probably should just go ask somebody or ask an expert, hey, what can I expect for these? We've done enough of them that we've got this pretty dialed in. But we know our utility expenses. But if you're thinking about all the things you need to think about, you're thinking about utilities. I'm just moving down the line here, our taxes, our insurance. Expenses, that's going to be a variable that's hard for you to predict. The ones I just mentioned, the taxes, the insurance, the utilities, that's a little bit more predictable. You can look at past history to see that. You could also look at past history to figure out expenses, but that one is a little bit more unpredictable. So I like to use a percentage. And this one, I'm using 7.5% of my rents. I'm planning that that's going to go out the door to go toward expenses, right? My other one is property management. Like it's always important, even if you're going to self-manage it, it's always important to put that in there so you can underwrite the deal, knowing that you might not want to manage this forever. And when you go to sell it, that buyer they're definitely going to factor in property management. So you need to factor it in on your numbers. Last thing is vacancy. I know in our markets, this typically isn't an issue. We see literally like 0% vacancy. Guys, to share you this from our portfolio, actually, our property management team's goal is to be at 98% or above. That's literally what we set our goal for this year. So that's like a 2% vacancy. And that's like across the board that includes my turnarounds. Like if I'm going to go vacant for 30 days because somebody moves out, but we target 98%, which is really high. But in this reform, I'm being much more conservative and doing 7.5%. So anyways, we work down here, and I've got a full video, which I'm going to show you guys, and it'll dive deeper here, but I wanted to give you the basics, right? So if you factor that all in, that gives us our NOI per month, which is our net operating income. So that's the amount of money we can expect each month, right? That number, I go a lot deeper in the spreadsheet of like, hey, what is that? Like, how do we now evaluate the value of the property? Because when you're looking at multifamily, the value is derived from the net operating income and a cap rate, which is defined by the market or defined by an appraiser, right? Too long of a conversation for today, but ultimately this is how we outline it all. The last thing I do here is on this deal, I'm planning to go refinance this property in 24 months. So I wanted to say, okay, now if I go put debt on this property, will I still service the debt, right? And that's kind of the very bottom down here. I show DSCR. That is a debt service coverage ratio. That's a really important number that the bank's going to look at. And it factors in all the money that's coming in and all the money that's going out. And they just look at that as a ratio, right? They typically, again, depends on the bank, typically want to see over 1.25 and above to be able to lend. Because again, like I said, our exit strategy on this deal is to be able to refinance. So I kind of run all that through a pro forma because again, I want to do this all on the front end before I go buy this asset because I want to be able to articulate and define my exit strategy, both from within my company to my private money investors. Maybe it's going to be to the bank, but running all these numbers and doing it the right way and having it done on the front end, guys, makes a huge difference. So if I could give you one little piece of advice, take your time to do this and have this ready. It's going to go a long way when you're working with other partners or lenders. Okay, so again, here's a little link. If you guys are seeing it, I'll put it at the end of the, you'll be able to see it in the notes so you guys can link directly to it. But this is a breakdown of this deal in about 30 minutes. So let's see, 33 minutes. We break down what I just talked about in 4 to 5 minutes, but much deeper dive if you want to go into like a comprehensive underwriting look. All right, now as part of the underwriting, there's also the due diligence. I kind of put these two together, right? So I've been talking about the comprehensive underwriting and the pro forma. We just went over that, right? The next thing though is you want to do some market research. You want to understand, is this city growing? Are rents growing? What does that all look like, right? You want to look at the comparable sales. That's where I was talking about the cap rates in multifamily. You're going to be able to get a cap rate based on the comparable sales. Or if you're flipping a house, you need to look at your comparable sales. Then the other part is obviously inspections. We always want to go get inspections before we buy. I mean, it depends on the asset, how detailed we go into the inspections, but you always want to cover your bases that way. And then local intel. I'm going to kind of show you what we did on this one deal as an example of that, but this is something that really I'm able to leverage my network. And because I've done so many deals in Wyoming and Montana over the years, we've just got connections in every month, in every market. And for example, if I'm buying this big multifamily, well, let me just show you this. I've got up here now, I've got Dave's notes, and then I've got Tanya's notes, and then some of the seller notes. But I literally I made a call to a guy that I knew in this market. I used to work with him in my W-2 job. And I'm like, hey, Dave, tell me more about this property. You live in Evanston. I want to get the dirty secrets of this property. Cause the seller's not going to tell you everything, right? So you want to do a little research, right? You're going to go do some investigation on this property. So I like talking to other people. Another thing I like to do is I like to go talk to contractors, right? I know that contractors have been working on this property. Hey, especially in a big multifamily property, they've obviously been using contractors. We'll go talk to those guys. What issues have they seen with the property? So I like to do all these different things when I'm looking at my underwriting, in addition to my inspections and the main stuff. As far as the market, I wanted to show you guys an example of everything we did on our market analysis. So this was for that same deal in Evanston, Wyoming, 45 units. So this is my comparables, right? This is me looking at what is on the market as a rental. You could do this online, very easy. Go check what's everything renting for, what type of properties they are. That's what I kind of put in, the price per month. I put in the bed, bath, the square footage, and then I made some comments what's different between this and what I'm planning to bring to the market when I renovate this property, right? And then I shared some links. I like sharing this with our private money lenders or investors. That way they can kind of see the same, because they're going to want to look for this anyway. I think it's really helpful. And what I always encourage people to do if they're raising money or trying to find partners is you're doing research, or you should be doing research as the operator. And if you are, be transparent, show that, make it easy for them. I know our lenders appreciate that because it just makes it easier to work with, right? They don't have to go look up all that stuff. So that's essentially what I did here. And then I kind of just highlighted some reasons for growth, right? This apartment, I'm super, super excited about. Not only ignoring all these growth things, the pro forma looks phenomenal and the seller finance terms we got are unbelievable. But another thing is well, is this area poised for growth? And that's where I kind of highlighted some different things going on in the city. Again, I tried to put links in there. I tried to show the location. For example, this one is an hour and 60 miles from Park City. And if anybody's ever been to Park City and know how much that area is blown up, there's literally people that will commute and live in this market where we've got this apartment, and they'll commute all the way down there because it's just more affordable. So I think this helps you to really present the upside of the project. But I recommend doing this on any type of, just as really part of your due diligence. All right. We talked about how we made offers already. All right. Now I think we could segue into financing the deal, right? How are we going to put the deal together? We've marketed it. We found it. We got it under contract. We did our due diligence. And you should be thinking this is not really necessarily sequential. You should have been thinking about your financing long before this, but these are the ways we finance it. I didn't actually highlight this too much, but I always make an offer to all of our sellers. I did say this. I talked about how we give them a cash offer and a creative offer, right? Well, let's say they're you know what? I just want to be done. I want the cash offer. I want to close now and not deal with anything. I need the money, right? There's a lot of sellers like this. If we get that, typically the way we're going to fund that is we're going to do it through private money or a small bank. And then obviously we're going to go and fix it up and make the profit for again, if it's in a limited partnership or in one of my funds where they're going to make the profit, or if it's a private money lender, it's going to be a fixed interest rate. But typically that's how we go finance these deals. And it's just really important. I've been talking about working with private money lenders and partners. If you're really disclosing a lot and being very transparent with them on the numbers, that's going to make it a lot easier to go and fund your deal, right? And the same thing goes for a small bank. A small bank, if you're doing this same sort of due diligence and all this front end work, your small bank is going to love you because it's really going to separate you from all the other people, all their other borrowers who they're having to beg for all their stuff from, right? So that's one way if it needs a lot of work and we're going to flip it, right? But there's also sometimes where we're just going to wholesale the property. We're literally just going to get it under contract, and I've got a great network of other investors. And there's sometimes where you know what? I'm just going to sell that to another investor. We'll either do a double close where I buy it and sell it to them on the same day, or there's sometimes I'll just assign my contract to them, right? So that's another way that we essentially not really financing it. That's the way we close the deal, right? Another way is a wholesale. So a wholesale is simply a property that, you know what, we're not going to go spend all the time to fix this up and make it a perfect, beautiful flip. We're just literally going to close on the property. Typically, we will try to trash it out or clean it up and make it a little bit more presentable. And then we'll go list it on the market and try to get as many buyers as we can. But we're not going to take it as far as we are on a flip. So when we're doing that, though, to finance that, often I'm going to use a small bank or a private money lender. On that one, I'd rather use private money lenders than a small bank just because it's so fast and the turn time is typically 30, 60, 90 days on a wholesale. So a bank isn't really going to want to, and honestly, you're not going to want to jump through all the headaches with a bank for that fast of a loan anyway. So typically that's a great way to do with a partner, another cash partner or a private money lender. Novations, again, I'm not going to dive too deep in this. It's just another strategy where, as I mentioned earlier, we're just going to let the seller give us permission to go market the property for them. And the big value we bring, again, is we can make the repairs. We can help them get that house sold and just make it a lot more painless for them. And then seller finance. So again, if they're seller financing it, that's a great way to finance the property. You don't have to go to a bank because the bank is already in place, right? Whether that's the seller or you taking over their loan sub two, which we're going to get to on my next slide. It's just a great way to set it up. But often though, I'm going to show you guys some case studies here in a second where we combine creative finance or seller finance or sub two with private money. And it's a great way that we're doing a lot of our deals right now. When you do this though, it's really important if you're doing a seller finance that you complete a third-party authorization. This is just a tip I put in here that we always do. This allows me to this more comes into play if I'm taking over loan subject to. Like if something happens to my seller, heaven forbid, right? If they disappear, I still need to get it when I'm ready to flip this, or if I need to contact the lender, I need to have permission. So we get the permission via a third-party authorization on the front end. And then it's also important that you set up the insurance correctly. This is one that can trigger the due on sale, which is the biggest risk when it comes to seller finance. Is people mess up the insurance. They'll go get a new insurance policy, and then the insurance policy automatically sends something into the lender saying, hey, so-and-so now owns this property. That's a good way to go flag this property to get the due on sale called. So I definitely advise people be careful on that. What we do to avoid all that is we just simply add ourselves as an additional insured on the current policy on the property, right? We tell the seller, hey, go call your insurance. Please add my LLC or whatever entity I'm using as an additional insured on the insurance policy. Really good tip for you guys if you're thinking about this. Yeah, and then we kind of talked earlier, Rivers asked a good question about how to using a third-party company. We typically will use a third-party escrow company to manage the payments. All right, talking about what is sub two, you guys might be asking this at this point. I've been talking about these different ways to finance it. And why would anybody ever do this? And why in our pipeline is literally probably 50% of my deals I'm doing are subject to? Well, the way it works is you're literally taking over the seller's mortgage, right? You're taking over payments. And then as I put optional, sometimes we'll make payments if it's a hybrid based on their equity. But the important part you got to understand here is, and this is a lot of people's first question, wait, well, whose name is the mortgage in? Is this an assumption? And it is not an assumption. Assumption is when you go through the process and you get the loan put in your name. That's another great strategy, right? But that's a lot more work and may or may not be approved by the bank. This scenario is you're literally leaving the loan in the seller's name, and then we take over the property. But again, this is all done through a title company. Everyone understands what's going on, and we just take over the payments, right? Typically, the bank doesn't have an issue with this. All they care about is getting paid. But there is the risk of due on sale, which is probably a whole nother presentation we could talk about, but there's a lot of ways you can mitigate that. What due on sale means is the bank might be like, well, what? Hold on, they transfer the deed and now somebody else owns it, but we still have this loan. Well, they could be like, their way to remedy that situation is trigger the due on sale, which would mean, hey, you guys have to go pay off this loan. You have 30 days or whatever. But typically, well, they're going to say 30 days, but their remedy is to foreclose on the property, if they really wanted to push this. So typically you have some time to go remedy the situation. So that is certainly a risk and one that we look at and we try to mitigate well. But at the end of the day, there's just multiple ways to mitigate this risk. So it's a different presentation, but a big benefit of sub two. It's a much worthwhile risk. When you could take over a loan at 2.75% versus go buy at 8%, and you've got the small due on sale risk, which you can mitigate, to me, it makes it a no-brainer. We already kind of talked about the benefits of it. It's faster closing. It really just helps sellers that I talked about this earlier, they have no equity, right? There's no way for them to sell this property without bringing money to closing. And sometimes we'll give them a little bit of cash to do it. So it's a really good solution for sellers who don't have much equity. Let's see. Yeah, these are just some of the documents, which I already kind of talked about. So I'm going to kind of keep rolling into, I think, some case studies. So a couple of case studies explain these different strategies and give you guys just a little bit of perspective on how this works. This is a sub two strategy we did. This is in Rock Springs. So this one, you can kind of see the numbers here, but we actually combined, as I talked about this a second ago, we combined a subject to loan, so loan in the seller's name that I took over the payments for, and then I brought in a private money lender who put in $40,000. That was to help with the rehab. It was to help the seller wanted a little bit of money up front. So that's what a lot of that money went into, right? But my private money lender was happy because I think I showed it here. I always like to show the LTV. So if you can see this on the slide, kind of top right, I always like showing the LTV on these deals because in general, we talked about the 70% rule earlier. If that's a good cushion, right? So what I say to my private money lender is say, hey, you're in second position, yes, but the first position plus, so you take the first position loan amount plus the second position and divide that by the value of the property. If that's less than 70%, it's a pretty risk-free, I won't say risk-free, but it's a good way to de-risk your investment because you've got 30%. Literally, the market could drop 30% before you would be in jeopardy of the house being worth less than being underwater on your loan, right? As you guys know, most people buy their house with like 5 to 10% down through different FHA and conventional loans, right? In this case, it'd be like a seller putting down 30%. So you'd probably a bank would feel really good if you're putting 30%, just like a seller or just like your private money lender would. So anyway, this is a good case study kind of showing that. This is going to be, I kind of showed like the ARVs, the monthly payment and the cash flow, right? So the cool thing about this property is it's going to cash flow about $500 a month. I'm combining our company is able to do this deal with really no money down. And then I'm able to bring in a private money lender who gets a great return. And then everybody wins, right? Literally the seller won because he sold his house. We made it easy. We win because we've got this cash flow with no money down. My private money lender wins because he's able to get like 10 or 12% on this one was 12% he's going to make. And he's secured by a real asset. So really cool strategy where multiple people win. Here's another case study we talked about. Oh, hold on. So this one was just a Subto. We took over their mortgage, right? But this one is now a contract for deed, and it was actually a hybrid, right? So I actually put $10,000 down. I didn't use a private money lender on this one. We put down $10,000, and we're basically making a payment each month. Part of it's going to the seller's loan, part of it's going to the seller for their equity, right? But if you look at the numbers here, this is renting for $1,795. And I don't have all the breakdown of all the expenses and the mortgage we took over and the payment to the seller for their equity. But when you break it all down, it's making about, did I put the cash flow on here? Well, either way, you know what? I actually didn't put it on there, but this was a 1% rule. The reason I wanted to highlight this one was if you look at the purchase price, well, this was a home run, right? I got both. I not only got it with no money down not money. Sorry. I said I only put $10,000 down. So this was a seller finance one that cash flows. I built equity and it's a 1% rule. So good example of it. Purchase price 170. My rents down here are 1795. So you could see we're actually greater than 1%. So a really cool deal we did with contract for deed. This one is in Laramie. So a lot of rental demand, going to be a great little property. Our next case study is the Revive method. So this is, again, for another presentation because we can go really deep here. This is a really cool strategy we've been doing. But essentially, what I told the seller is say, hey, we could buy your property. I'm going to take over your mortgage. I'm going to go pay for all the renovations. And then when we sell it, that's when I'm going to pay you, right? So it's a way to basically do a Subto flip. But we do this often because typically the seller doesn't get any money on the front end. They just get paid on the back end, as do I, right? But I'm going to go put my money into the deal to fix up this property. But the nice thing is I don't have to go fund the loan amount, right? I don't have to go fund on this deal, for example. The first position lien was $185,000. I didn't want to have to go borrow $185,000 from a bank or a private money lender. Instead, I just took over the payment, right? And then I went and paid for the rehab. And then when we got done, that's when the seller got paid. And then we got paid back for our renovations plus a profit. And in this scenario was also one I worked with a partner, or it was like a private money partner. So anyway, he put about $75,000 in this because it was a pretty big rehab. But at the end of the day, it was a good return. It was well secured. I put this LTV was a little bit higher, is at 81%. But yeah, just another good example of us using creative finance. And honestly, guys, this is one we're probably doing more than anything right now because just in Wyoming and Montana in our markets, there's not enough contractors. So we're able to do on this strategy is this seller, right? They've got a house that needs all this work and they could sell it at a big discount or they could fix it up and get top dollar. What I say is, hey, let me help you get top dollar by using our contractors. So we structure this contract where I can get in there and I've got guys that I can move in like in a week versus they probably, even if they wanted to fix them up and they had the money, they might be waiting 2 to 3 months before they could get a crew. So we'll move our contractors in. These happen really quick and it's just been a really good revenue source for our company, and I'm excited to do more and more of these deals. All right, I'm going to skip this one. This was just a hybrid case study where another one we've already kind of talked about this. The only thing I'll highlight is this is actually one we were going to sell to a turnkey buyer because these are the terms that we were going to sell it at. The seller, because we were going to wrap this to another investor because we had such good terms to where they could put $57,000 down based on the cash flow So I got my market rent. This is kind of showing the underwriting, right? The market rent minus the monthly payments. That basically gives a ROI based on the cash. So when I say ROI, that's the cash on cash return. So that's the amount of profit per year divided by the $57,000 investment. That's about 13%. So it's a really solid ROI and a good cash flow for a property. All right, this is my last case study, and we're going to wrap up, but a really, really cool one, and just kind of a microcosm of like where our company is going and the bigger deals that we're excited to look at. So we bought this property last June. If you guys follow me on social media, you've probably seen this one. This was in Casper, Wyoming. Originally 63 units. We're actually up to 65 right now because we're buying back. Some of them are individually owned, and we're buying back a couple of them. So the way we structured this was, this was actually a hybrid of debt and equity, right? I took this down with an equity partner, but I also raised some money with a private money lender because some of the equity I put in, I actually just leveraged. I used some other properties that I had that had equity, and I basically put a lien on those to where I could raise the money for those. So the reason I highlight this is like there's so many people that are winning on this deal, right? I'm able to get into a big multifamily property. I've been able to build our contracting base because we've had a huge project. My private money partner, I should say my partner on this deal, he's gotten into an asset and he's been able to be completely passive and make a great return on his money. And then I've got private money lenders that were also able to come in and fund this deal because the strategy is we're going to be able to go in. We're already kind of halfway through. Well, more than that. We're actually almost finished with all the renovations. But once we get this thing fully occupied, we could go back to the bank and refinance it. And that's when me and my partners, the plan is to do it's basically a huge BRRRR strategy where we can refinance this whole thing, get all of our money back. And that's when I'm going to go pay back some of my private money lenders. And so I'll be all into the deal with no money. My partner is going to be all into the deal with no money into it. And we're going to be able to keep this as a cash flowing asset, right? But you're probably wondering, like, how do the numbers work? How do you get all your money back? Well, check this out. So at the bottom, we've actually already had one of our units appraised. It was actually owned by by a private owner. And it appraised just a couple of months ago. It was actually in a building that we haven't even finished renovating. And it's still it's a mess in that building. Literally, it's the worst building of the three. And it appraised for $90,000. Well, our basis in each one of these is around $60,000 to $65,000. And that's my purchase plus my rehab. So if you take that $90K that they're appraising for minus what our cost is, and you multiply that by like all the units, that's like we've created like $1.8 to $2.16 million of equity. That's what's going to allow us to be able to pull that money out, keep the asset, and be able to get our cash out. So really, really exciting deal. And I'm excited to do more of these. That other 45 unit that I was showing you it's been kind of our example throughout this presentation. Like that one is designed to be just like this one. And the reason, honestly, guys, the reason why I have confidence to go do it again is we've literally done it on this one. It's a similar story, right? Where this was a property that was neglected, had a lot of issues with tenants, like a colored history with people doing drugs and just not a good tenant base, right? But our team got really good at, hey, we had to filter through and we had to deal with a bunch of evictions. But once you get that out and you start to bring in the tenants that we've screened and use our property management company, which is a great segue into the next series, it's going to be part 3, but you being able to use those teams, we're able to really improve this property and we're excited to go do it again. So anyway, that's that last case study. I'll kind of open it up for questions and just to kind of tease what we're going to talk about next week. So we talked all this week about how to find the deal, do due diligence, underwrite, and fund it. Next week, we're going to talk about, hey, how do we renovate properties? How do we leverage our construction team, which I've kind of teased a little bit today, but we're going to do a much deeper dive next week. And then the following week, we'll get into, hey, how do we manage these properties? How do we do property management? How do we deal with the evictions on a deal like this? How do we run that process? And really, I've always just loved having control of property management because nobody cares about your property as much as you do. So that has been a big driver for us to vertically integrate our property or our company and have property management. So we're going to dive into that one week 3 and week 2 construction. And then this week, how to find the deal. And I know a lot of people are probably in the audience and not able to, or maybe they haven't not able to ask a question, or people are going to watch this recording later. So I encourage you guys to comment below any questions you have. And the other piece is this is my last slide, kind of sharing with you guys. This is a QR code. I'll also put a link below. But if you guys want to go on there, you guys can go see more YouTube videos because a lot of things I highlight in this presentation, I dive deeper on our YouTube channel. But I've also got a link in there to set up a 15-minute call if you want to talk more about how I can help you maybe go execute one of these strategies, or maybe you're like, hey, man, this is super interesting, but I don't have the time that I do and my company has to go execute on all this. And if you want to talk about other opportunities, I highlighted a lot of deals where we're working with private money lenders. So if you guys are interested in that, I definitely encourage you to get on a 15-minute call. I'd love to hear more about your goals, and we can kind of go from there. But there's also some other links to some other, I think, resources you guys will really enjoy. So encourage you to click that link, and yeah, love to help answer any questions and help you guys any way I can.